Chapter 16, Michael Gray appears. Oliver Grant felt both heartache and gratitude. Thankfully, he had found the mother and son, otherwise, who knew how much more suffering they would have endured. The SUV came to a stop in front of a 7-story building. Without paying attention to Oliver Grant, Sophia Lewis hurriedly got out of the car and ran upstairs. Sure enough, the door to her apartment was wide open, and the small 10-square-meter room had been ransacked. Sophia Lewis gave a bitter smile and stepped inside to pack her clothes. This apartment, was it robbed? Oliver Grant followed closely behind, feigning surprise. In reality, he already knew about it. He had even checked the cameras around the building, but unfortunately, this area wasn't well monitored, and there were too few cameras to gather anything useful. However, he didn't want Sophia Lewis to know he had investigated this matter. Yes. Sophia Lewis, of course, didn't notice Oliver Grant's intentions. The people who kidnapped me took all my identification documents. I guess they came here to search for more. But who could have such significant influence? Apart from Ethan Tanner, she couldn't think of anyone else. It's just that his attitude didn't seem to match. Sophia Lewis felt deeply conflicted inside. After tidying up a few important things, Sophia Lewis took one last lingering look at the small room she had rented for nearly half a year, then decisively turned and left. She declined Oliver Grant's offer to take her to a high-end department store, feeling that her current wardrobe was sufficient for daily life. Of course, there was still a hint of pride in her heart. No matter how desperate her situation, she didn't want to spend Ethan Tanner's money. However, when passing by the supermarket, she asked Oliver Grant to stop for a moment so she could buy some snacks Nathan Tanner liked. After all, staying in the hospital could be incredibly dull, and she worried that her naturally energetic son wouldn't sit still. Oliver Grant, if I stay at the hospital, will Miss Diana mind? Sophia Lewis hesitated as she asked. The question left Oliver Grant momentarily stunned. What does this have to do with her? Well, she's his official girlfriend, so I feel a little awkward, Sophia Lewis said, her face flushing red. If it weren't for Nathan Tanner, she might not even have had the chance to approach him. Finally understanding, Oliver Grant explained, Miss Lewis, you've misunderstood. Diana Sanders left the entertainment industry 2 years ago to take up the position of Public Relations Director at CG Corporation. She and the third young master only have a professional relationship. This matter concerned the lifelong happiness of his employer, so he had to clarify it thoroughly. Hearing this, Sophia Lewis froze in shock. How could that be? Don't doubt it, it's the truth. All of this was for her. Oliver Grant almost blurted out those words. A complex and indescribable emotion surged within Sophia Lewis. She bit her lip and said nothing further. Returning to the hospital, it was nearly dawn. Nathan Tanner was already asleep on a small bed in the adjacent room. Sophia Lewis tucked her son in, gazing at his chubby little face for a long while before quietly leaving the room. At this moment, Ethan Tanner was also asleep. Under the soft amber light, his handsome face and Nathan Tanner's sleeping posture bore an uncanny resemblance, almost 80% alike. Sophia Lewis didn't dare to look for too long. She quickly turned off the lights and quietly lay down on the makeshift bed on the floor. Unexpectedly, just as she closed her eyes, the man on the bed suddenly opened his, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. At 6 in the morning, Sophia Lewis was already awake. Years of work had trained her to have an exceptionally accurate internal clock. Seeing that Ethan Tanner was still asleep, she quietly started preparing breakfast. Mom. A little while later, Nathan Tanner rubbed his eyes and walked into the kitchen. I want some steamed buns. All right. Sophia Lewis lovingly patted her son's head. I'll make some for you after I finish cooking porridge, okay? Having lived with Sophia Lewis for so long, Nathan Tanner had adopted her daily habits. In fact, compared to other children his age, he slept much less. Sophia Lewis always felt that Nathan Tanner's slightly smaller stature might be related to this, but due to life's demands, she had no other choice. She could only try to compensate by carefully preparing his meals. Yay, that's great! Nathan Tanner spread his arms and hugged Sophia Lewis tightly around the waist. His long lashes fluttered like little fans. Mom, you're the best. Shh, keep your voice down. Sophia Lewis was startled and quickly covered Nathan Tanner's mouth. If they woke up the big bad boss, there'd be trouble. Mom, why are you so scared of Dad? Nathan Tanner furrowed his brows. Dad's really nice. Sure, he's a bit cold, but he's the boss, so he has to maintain his authority. Just as Nathan Tanner finished speaking, the hand hanging loosely by the bed quietly clenched into a fist. Father and son truly are on the same page. Ethan Tanner felt immensely satisfied. The beauty was right beside him, yet Ethan Tanner couldn't sleep. In the stillness of the night, every time he closed his eyes, vivid memories of Sophia Lewis from 4 years ago would flood back. When he opened them, the woman who stirred his heart was right in front of him, making it impossible to rest. Unexpectedly, Sophia Lewis woke up early. Left with no choice, Ethan pretended to be asleep. To his surprise, he found unexpected joy in overhearing his son compliment him. Nathan Tanner, you're still young and don't understand anything. Sophia Lewis sighed deeply. The bankruptcy of the Lewis Corporation was a lingering pain in her heart, and she had long experienced the cold indifference of this man. Mom, then let's make some buns first. Likely driven by hunger, Nathan Tanner quickly shifted focus. All right, let's do that. Sophia Lewis secretly breathed a sigh of relief. The mother and son happily began kneading dough. Meanwhile, on the hospital bed, the man felt a stifling discomfort in his chest. Making buns was Sophia Lewis's specialty. Before long, several steaming baskets of buns were ready. She also prepared a few side dishes. Once everything was set, she blushed slightly and carefully woke Ethan Tanner. Ethan Tanner continued to feign ignorance, maintaining his usual cold demeanor. Sophia Lewis skillfully helped him brush his teeth and wash his face, then placed the prepared food on the hospital bed. Go open the door. Ethan Tanner suddenly commanded in a cold tone. Was Oliver Grant here? Sophia Lewis was a bit confused but followed his instructions. What she didn't expect at all was that the person standing outside was Michael Gray. Michael, why are you here? Sophia Lewis was utterly astonished. Michael Gray's face looked haggard, his dark eyes clouded with a faint layer of sorrow. After just one night apart, the handsome and gentle young man had become noticeably haggard, causing Sophia Lewis to feel deeply worried. Michael, are you all right? She widened her sparkling eyes, tears welling up at the corners, her gaze filled with concern. Sophia, I'm here to see my third uncle. Michael Gray suppressed the pain in his heart, deliberately putting on a distant demeanor. Hearing this, Sophia Lewis was momentarily stunned. That title seemed somewhat familiar. Yesterday at Serenity Haven Nursing Home, she had indeed heard Michael Gray mention something similar. Could it be? Sophia Lewis held her breath. Chapter 17, A Good Show. Michael Gray indifferently glanced past Sophia Lewis and walked straight to the hospital bed. Third uncle. He nodded slightly, his deep voice filled with respect. Ethan Tanner's cold gaze remained fixed on Sophia Lewis. Uncle Gray. Nathan Tanner, who was eating a small bun, exclaimed joyfully, put down his food, and ran toward Michael Gray. Michael Gray suppressed the urge to hug Nathan Tanner, merely responding with a calm, Uncle Gray, so you know my dad. Nathan Tanner habitually grabbed Michael Gray's hand, his innocent smile radiant. Dad, Uncle Gray is very nice to me and Mom. Really? Ethan Tanner smirked, his tone indifferent yet tinged with laziness. Nathan Tanner, go outside and see if Uncle Oliver Grant has arrived yet. Okay. Nathan Tanner nodded enthusiastically, let go of Michael Gray's hand, grabbed 2 small buns, and ran off while calling back to Sophia Lewis, Mom, I'll stay close by, not too far. Sophia Lewis silently watched her son's figure fading away, a sense of unease creeping into her heart. Clearly, this was Ethan Tanner's ploy to send Nathan Tanner away. Come here. Ethan Tanner ordered her at this moment. Sophia Lewis bit her lip and obediently stepped forward. Do you plan to let the food turn to stone before feeding me? Ethan Tanner frowned, his expression full of disdain. Sophia Lewis shook her head, picked up the bowl of porridge, scooped a spoonful, and brought it to his lips. Ethan Tanner ate the entire bowl of porridge without sparing a glance at Michael Gray, who stood silently nearby. It was evident he was deliberately ignoring him. Michael Gray remained unhurried, quietly observing without uttering a word, until Ethan Tanner finished his breakfast completely. The atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Sophia Lewis, slightly flustered, wiped Ethan Tanner's mouth and hurriedly took the dishes to the kitchen. How much longer? Ethan Tanner asked coldly. Following Uncle Henry's instructions, I arrived at 4 in the morning. Michael Gray respectfully replied. Although Sophia Lewis was in the kitchen, the walls were not soundproof, so she clearly heard Michael Gray's words and was stunned. It was already 8 in the morning now, which meant Michael Gray had been waiting outside for 4 hours. I heard you have concerns about taking over the West Africa project? Ethan Tanner raised an eyebrow, his indifferent tone exuding arrogance. Uncle, I just feel that this project involves a huge investment, and the initial preparations have already taken a lot of time. Now that it's suddenly handed over to me, I'm afraid I might not do well. Michael Gray lowered his eyes. What, are you doubting your own abilities? Ethan Tanner sneered. A few days ago, your father was begging me to give you another chance, and now that the opportunity has come, you want to refuse. I didn't mean that, then are you questioning my decision? Ethan Tanner's voice suddenly turned cold, carrying a faint anger that even startled Sophia Lewis in the next room. Michael Gray pressed his lips together in silence. He wasn't foolish, arguing at this moment would be no different from digging his own grave. Michael Gray, remember this, you're nothing more than a stray dog taken in by the Tanner family. Know your place. Understood. Get out. Ethan Tanner closed his eyes. At that moment, a fleeting shadow of gloom flashed in Michael Gray's eyes, but it quickly disappeared, leaving behind his usual calm demeanor. Sophia Lewis couldn't believe her ears. Even though Michael Gray was a subordinate, what gave Ethan Tanner the right to use such humiliating words to address him? Michael Gray had helped her many times before. If she didn't speak up for him now, she would feel deeply guilty. However, by the time she mustered the courage to run out, Michael Gray had already left the hospital room. Sophia Lewis glared at Ethan Tanner and, without hesitation, chased after him. "Michael, wait!" Seeing Michael Gray had reached the elevator door, Sophia Lewis hurriedly called out. Hearing the voice, Michael Gray stopped in his tracks, his dark eyes softening slightly as he watched Sophia Lewis's petite figure approaching closer. Due to running too quickly, Sophia Lewis couldn't stop in time and crashed straight into Michael Gray's chest. Michael Gray instinctively wrapped his arm around Sophia Lewis's slender waist, the soft sensation making him tremble slightly. This was truly a perfect opportunity for a confession. Unfortunately. "Michael, what exactly happened?" Sophia Lewis, completely oblivious to the change in Michael Gray's emotions, furrowed her delicate and angry face. "Why didn't you fight back when he insulted you like that earlier?" Michael Gray suddenly smiled. As long as she said something like this, no matter how much humiliation he endured from Ethan Tanner, it would all be worth it. Uncle Ethan has always been like that, and besides, Michael Gray hesitated for a moment. What he said wasn't entirely wrong. "I don't understand." Sophia Lewis shook her head. "Sophia, I can't explain everything to you right now. But trust me, I have no ill intentions toward you or Nathan Tanner." Michael Gray unconsciously tightened his grip. "I know." Sophia Lewis's eyes turned red, her voice beginning to choke. "Michael, if it weren't for your help, my mother might not have survived until now. As long as you understand me, that's enough." Michael Gray smiled gently. "As for my relationship with him, it's too complicated to explain in just a few words. I'll explain it all to you later." "Explain what?" Sophia Lewis was about to respond when a low, chilling voice sounded from behind her, like the Grim Reaper himself. Michael Gray's expression shifted, and he quickly released his hold. Sophia Lewis turned around, only to see Ethan Tanner leaning against the door, his dark eyes cold as winter. "Uncle, why are you out of bed?" Michael Gray promptly adopted a respectful demeanor. "Humph, if I hadn't come, how could I have witnessed such an entertaining scene?" Ethan Tanner sneered, his gaze sweeping over Sophia Lewis. Sophia instinctively lowered her head, too afraid to say a word. "Oh, Uncle Gray, are you leaving already?" At that moment, Nathan Tanner came bounding over, holding Oliver Grant's hand. "Yes, I have some things to handle." Michael Gray broke into a cold sweat, relieved that Nathan Tanner arrived just in time, and quickly changed the subject. Oliver Grant, who had been cheerful, froze the moment he saw Ethan Tanner standing at the hospital room door. He immediately let go of Nathan Tanner's hand and hurried over to Ethan Tanner's side. "Third young master, the doctor instructed you not to leave the bed." Oliver frowned, speaking in a low voice. Ethan Tanner said nothing, allowing Oliver to assist him back into the hospital room. Only after Ethan Tanner disappeared from sight did Sophia Lewis finally breathe a sigh of relief. "Well, I'll be going now." Michael Gray nodded at Sophia Lewis, smiled at Nathan Tanner, and turned to step into the elevator. "Goodbye, Uncle Gray." Nathan Tanner waved enthusiastically. The little boy had no idea that right where he stood, a dramatic scene had unfolded just moments ago. Chapter 18, The Truth About the Bankruptcy. After bidding farewell to Michael Gray, Sophia Lewis held Nathan Tanner's hand, her heart uneasy as they returned to the hospital room. At this moment, Ethan Tanner was sitting up against the headboard. Due to the earlier commotion, the wounds on his body had started bleeding again. Third young master, your wounds are bleeding again. Oliver Grant exclaimed in worry, his nerves on edge. Oliver Grant, get this woman out of here. I don't want to see her anymore. Ethan Tanner's face was pale, his voice icy cold, piercing to the bone. Hearing this, the three people in the room were stunned. Oliver Grant's mouth hung open, too afraid to say anything. What on earth had happened to make his boss this furious? Dad, don't send Mom away. Nathan Tanner immediately ran over, his face looking pitiful and adorable. Normally, whenever Nathan Tanner spoke to Ethan Tanner, he would always respond. But this time, it was as if he hadn't heard a thing. Oliver Grant realized the seriousness of the situation. He gently pulled Nathan Tanner aside, whispering, Nathan Tanner, it seems your mom and dad are just having a fight. Your dad's upset. Let him calm down, and I'll bring your mom back later, okay? Hearing this, Nathan Tanner frowned. I'm already this big, what could my parents still be arguing about? Your Uncle Gray was just here earlier. It probably has something to do with him. Oliver Grant lied casually. He knew Ethan Tanner's temperament well. Once a decision was made, it wouldn't easily change. He didn't want a fallout between father and son over Sophia Lewis. Uncle Gray? Nathan Tanner reacted with surprise, as if realizing something, and suddenly nodded in understanding. Ah, so that's it. Nathan Tanner's unfinished sentence caught Oliver Grant's attention. So that's what? Nathan Tanner grinned mischievously. Oh, so Dad's jealous. Got it, I understand now. After saying this, the little boy stretched out his tiny hand, tiptoeing to pat Oliver Grant on the shoulder. Then he turned around and flashed a bright smile at Sophia Lewis. Mom, take care on your way. When men and women argue, they should give each other time to cool off. When they meet again, their bond will only grow stronger. Turns out, TV dramas were right after all. Nathan Tanner's reaction left Sophia Lewis dumbfounded. She had thought her son would insist on staying with her, but to her surprise, he changed his stance in an instant. Now, she had no reason to stay any longer. Nathan Tanner. Uncle Oliver Grant, aren't you going to escort Mom out? Nathan Tanner shrugged, his expression indifferent. Oliver Grant suppressed a laugh and stepped in front of Sophia Lewis, blocking her line of sight as she glared at Nathan Tanner. Miss Lewis, please. Sophia Lewis felt like crying. Even her own biological son, whom she had raised for over 3 years, wasn't on her side. At this point, what else could she say? Though reluctant, she had no choice but to turn and leave the hospital room. Oliver Grant quietly closed the door and pulled Sophia Lewis to a secluded corner. Miss Lewis, can you tell me exactly what happened after young Master Gray arrived? Sophia Lewis didn't hold back, recounting every detail of the incident, afraid to miss even the smallest part. She truly couldn't understand what she had done to offend this king of hell. So, you let young Master Gray hold your waist? Oliver Grant quickly grasped the key issue and asked sharply. That's right. Sophia Lewis nodded blankly. She had always viewed Michael Gray as an older brother, so she didn't think it was inappropriate. Miss Lewis, you really are. Oliver Grant sighed deeply. No wonder Ethan Tanner was so furious that he kicked her out. This level of jealousy was not something an ordinary person could handle. Oliver Grant, be honest with me. Does Ethan Tanner have some grudge against Michael? Recalling Ethan Tanner's comment about a stray dog, Sophia Lewis still felt aggrieved. Oliver Grant was on the verge of losing his mind. "Miss Lewis, listen carefully. I'm only going to say this once." Oliver Grant took a deep breath, pausing briefly. "For the past few years, third young master has been looking for you, not because he still resents what you did to him, but because he likes you." Likes you. Do you understand? That's why he gets upset when he sees you with another man. Oliver Grant decided to take a risk. Knowing Ethan Tanner's personality, there was no way he would confess his feelings to Sophia Lewis himself. But the situation had become too awkward to ignore. Sophia Lewis was stunned into silence. This sounded completely absurd. "Here's what we'll do, I'll call Miss Carter, and you can go to her place to process what I just told you." Oliver Grant sighed. "Ethan Tanner, he likes me?" Sophia Lewis was entirely consumed by this question, her mind in turmoil. She didn't even notice when Hannah Carter arrived. It wasn't until Hannah Carter pressed a cold can of Coke against her face that she snapped out of it. "Hannah, why are you here?" Sophia Lewis asked in a daze. "Heavens, should I take you to see a psychiatrist?" Hannah Carter, wearing heavy makeup, shot her a sideways glance with a look of exasperation. "So, you didn't hear a single word I just said?" Sophia Lewis lowered her head in embarrassment. "My dear, you're sitting in my car right now, and it was that Grant guy who personally handed you over to me." Hannah Carter looked at her with a mix of frustration and pity. "Spill it. What on earth happened that made the devil himself, Ethan Tanner, do a complete 180 overnight and toss you out like this?" "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure." Sophia Lewis confessed, recounting the entire story, including what Oliver Grant had said. "Oh my gosh, Sophia, your suffering might finally be over!" Hannah Carter exclaimed, nearly breaking into a disco dance right in the car. "This is the perfect chance to teach that devil Ethan Tanner a lesson." "Hannah, I can't believe this is real." Sophia Lewis shook her head. "If Ethan Tanner truly cared about me, why would he scheme to bankrupt the Lewis Corporation?" "Wait a minute." Hannah Carter's almond-shaped eyes widened. "You don't think the Lewis Corporation's bankruptcy was Ethan Tanner's doing, do you? Isn't it?" Sophia Lewis gave a bitter smile. "Who told you that?" Hannah Carter asked in shock. "Don't you know? The Lewis Corporation went under because of your uncle, Henry Lewis." Hearing this, Sophia Lewis froze. "The day after news about you and Ethan Tanner broke, the Lewis Corporation's stock prices plummeted horribly. But that was just the market's natural reaction. What really brought the Lewis Corporation down was a failed investment, over $10 billion in losses. At the time, I just thought you were incredibly unlucky, but a year later, your uncle came back to Riverfield under the name of another company. And that company? It's the very business the Lewis Corporation had previously lost its fortune investing in." Chapter 19, Father and Daughter's Rift. How could this be? Sophia Lewis was stunned. Since she was 12, after her father passed away, her uncle Henry Lewis had taken over the Lewis Corporation. Over the years, he had been dedicated and hardworking, treating both her and her mother well. She couldn't believe that everything was orchestrated by him. Who would have thought your uncle was a wolf in sheep's clothing? When my dad told me about it, I didn't believe it either. Hannah Carter said as she pulled out her phone, quickly searching for something. Here, take a look. Sophia Lewis took the phone. On the screen was a profile photo from the Riverfield Business Conference, with a brief introduction about Henry Lewis, who was indeed the chairman of another company. And his daughter, Emily Lewis, Sophia Lewis's cousin, was the CEO of that company. Sophia still remembered that during her most desperate time, she secretly called Emily for help. At that time, Emily told her that after the Lewis Corporation went bankrupt, their family was also living miserably, being chased by creditors. Emily even kindly advised her not to return, saying that Ethan Tanner, after destroying the Lewis Corporation, still hadn't vented his anger and was offering a reward for finding her whereabouts. In other words, it was all an act. I think you really misunderstood Ethan Tanner. Hannah Carter sighed, looking at Sophia with pity. The suffering you endured for the past 4 years was all for nothing. Sophia's mind was in turmoil. She never expected the truth she had been waiting for would turn out like this. So, what now? Hannah Carter stared at her. Why not go back and apologize to him? Why should I apologize? Sophia shook her head, feeling guilty. I'm upset with him because of how he treated Michael Gray. Do you even know who Michael Gray is? Hannah Carter sighed again. Sophia remained silent. Oh, my goodness, you really don't know anything. Hannah Carter exclaimed, holding her forehead. Ethan Tanner's sister is Richard Gray's second wife. Before that, Richard Gray already had a pair of twins, one of them is Michael Gray. Both of them only returned to the Tanner family last year. Sophia Lewis's mouth dropped open, nearly hitting the floor. No wonder Michael Gray called Ethan Tanner Uncle Ethan. But Michael Gray is really strange. He's someone close to Ethan Tanner, so he must know Ethan's been looking for you. Yet he deliberately hid you. Don't you think he has some ulterior motives? No way. Michael isn't like that. Sophia Lewis shook her head firmly. Michael Gray had always treated the three of them incredibly well, especially Nathan Tanner, almost as if he were his own son. She couldn't imagine why he would deceive her. You're just too gullible. Hannah Carter thought for a moment before suggesting, how about this? We've got nothing to do right now anyway, come with me to my studio. Whose studio? Sophia Lewis asked, confused. Mine, of course. Hannah Carter rolled her eyes. After I came back from studying abroad, I opened a high-end custom leather shoe studio with my dad's support. All the wealthy heiresses in Riverfield with billions in assets are my clients, which is why my information network is so sharp. All right, let's go. Sophia Lewis instantly perked up. She had always been interested in shoe design. If it weren't for chasing after Ethan Tanner in the past, she would have gone abroad to study with Hannah Carter. Hannah Carter's studio was located in an office building in the heart of Riverfield. Though not very spacious, it was decorated with impeccable taste. The walls were covered with design drafts of all styles. Sophia Lewis examined them closely, occasionally finding a piece she particularly liked, and a smile of appreciation would unconsciously appear on her lips. Well, what do you think? Impressive, right? Hannah Carter saw through her friend's thoughts and smiled. Interested in joining me? Me? No way. Sophia Lewis quickly shook her head. I only know the basics. How could I compare to a professional like you? You can always learn, Hannah Carter said, throwing an arm around Sophia Lewis's shoulders. Back in school, you were even more talented at drawing these things than I was. Besides, you can't just run a noodle shop forever. Hannah Carter's words made Sophia Lewis fall into deep thought. She truly needed a career that could support her family. Well, I'll give it a try. After hesitating for a moment, she nodded slightly. Hannah Carter was overjoyed and immediately called the studio's most experienced designer to teach Sophia Lewis the basics. Time flew by, and before long, it was already past midday. If it weren't for the end of the workday, Sophia Lewis would have continued learning. There's plenty of time, don't rush. Hannah Carter chuckled, linking arms with Sophia Lewis. Come on, let's go grab dinner. No way. Sophia Lewis quickly shook her head. I need to go home and cook for Nathan. She had been out for so long and couldn't help but wonder how her son was doing now. What? Isn't Nathan the one who supported Ethan Tanner in kicking you out? Why are you being so timid? Hannah Carter rolled her eyes in frustration. Sophia Lewis didn't know how to explain it to Hannah Carter. Perhaps she'd only understand once she became a mother herself. All right, I give up. Hannah Carter sighed, then made a call to Oliver Grant. When they returned to the hospital, Oliver Grant was already waiting at the building's entrance. This woman is all yours now. She seriously needs some discipline. Hannah Carter muttered under her breath before waving goodbye and driving off in her sports car. Seeing Oliver Grant made Sophia Lewis feel a little awkward. She had left so decisively earlier, and now she was sheepishly coming back. She had already braced herself for Oliver Grant's mockery. To her surprise, Oliver Grant looked utterly relieved, nearly bowing in gratitude. To Sophia Lewis. Mrs. Lewis, please hurry. The young master has been waiting anxiously. Him? Anxious? Sophia Lewis scoffed. Didn't he seem thrilled when he chased me out this morning? Despite her words, as soon as she entered the hospital room, Sophia Lewis noticed something unusually serious. Ethan Tanner was leaning back against the bed with his eyes closed, his expression dark and intimidating. Nathan Tanner, however, was nowhere to be seen. Nathan Tanner! Sophia Lewis gasped, instinctively calling out. As soon as the words left her mouth, a little boy darted out from the small room and threw himself into Sophia Lewis's arms. Mom! You're back! I missed you so much I could die. Nathan Tanner tilted his small face upward, his large, round eyes quickly shimmering with a thin layer of tears. She had intended to scold him, but seeing the pitiful look on his face, Sophia Lewis's heart softened. Nathan Tanner, have you been good? She asked gently, stroking her son's hair. Unexpectedly, Nathan Tanner glared at Ethan Tanner and let out a dissatisfied huff. Sophia Lewis froze for a moment. What are you doing back here? Ethan Tanner suddenly opened his eyes, narrowing them coldly with an air of indifference. Sophia Lewis was just about to respond when Nathan Tanner beat her to it. She's my mom. Of course, she can come back anytime she wants. You're a grown man, why are you being so petty? Chapter 20, Reconciliation. Sophia Lewis was startled. What on earth was going on between these two? She cast a pleading glance at Oliver Grant, but he merely shrugged and smiled helplessly. Not long after Sophia Lewis had left previously, Nathan Tanner started becoming restless, repeatedly asking Ethan Tanner when his mother would return. Irritated, Ethan Tanner had blurted out, "Not in this lifetime." A remark that had sent Nathan Tanner into a fit of anger. The father and son had gone back and forth, arguing loudly. Truth be told, Oliver Grant, who had been by Ethan Tanner's side for a long time, had never seen him talk this much to anyone before. Caught in the middle of their quarrel, Oliver Grant didn't dare to comment and had no choice but to endure it silently until now. This matter has nothing to do with being petty, Ethan Tanner said coldly. Ask her yourself what she has done. Hearing this, Nathan Tanner's eyes widened. Mom, did you really do something wrong? Sophia Lewis initially intended to say a few words to ease the tension, but upon hearing Ethan Tanner's accusation, her anger flared up. Nathan Tanner, don't listen to his nonsense. He's petty. Truly petty. Sophia Lewis. Ethan Tanner suddenly opened his eyes wide, his oppressive aura crashing down like a storm. Sophia Lewis trembled in fear but stubbornly glared back, refusing to back down. The atmosphere became silent in an instant. Nathan Tanner, flustered, looked back and forth between Sophia Lewis and Ethan Tanner. Wah! A loud cry, as if shaking the earth, broke the tense silence. Nathan Tanner held his chubby face, tears cascading down like a string of broken pearls. Nathan Tanner, what's wrong? Sophia Lewis was startled. Ethan Tanner frowned slightly. Though he said nothing, his gaze toward Nathan Tanner was filled with concern. You two are not good parents. Boo-hoo. I don't like you anymore. With that, the boy broke free from Sophia Lewis's grasp and ran into Oliver Grant's arms. Uncle Oliver Grant, you're the best to me. The situation unfolded so quickly that Oliver Grant hadn't even processed what was happening before Nathan Tanner pinched the back of his hand hard, snapping him back to reality. Sigh, why argue in front of a child? It hurts their little hearts so much. Oliver Grant pretended to sigh. As soon as he finished speaking, Nathan Tanner looked up at him with eyes full of admiration before burying his head and sobbing harder. The boy cried so loudly that Ethan Tanner and Sophia Lewis were both flustered, unsure of what to do. No matter how tough life got, Nathan Tanner had never complained once. Yet now, his heart-wrenching cries tugged at Sophia Lewis's heartstrings, making it ache painfully. Ethan Tanner's deep black eyes revealed unease. Several times, he opened his mouth to speak but held back, his earlier anger now replaced by relentless worry. Aren't you two going to do something? Oliver Grant signaled with a wink, mouthing the words to them. Sophia Lewis froze, hesitated for a moment, and then slowly walked to Ethan Tanner's side. Nathan Tanner, your mom and dad are fine, she said, forcing a smile as she leaned closer to Ethan Tanner. See? Everything is all right now, isn't it? Ethan Tanner stiffened, instinctively wanting to step back, but upon hearing Sophia Lewis's words, he stayed rooted to the spot. Oliver Grant felt elated inside but maintained a serious expression on the surface. Unexpectedly, Nathan Tanner continued crying, saying, You two, you're just brushing me off. We're not. This time. Both of them responded in unison. Ethan Tanner reached out and held Sophia Lewis's hand gently, saying, Nathan Tanner, it's normal for adults to argue, but your mom and I have already made up. The slight chill of his hand made Sophia Lewis shiver, yet somehow, a wave of warmth surged straight into her heart. Really? Nathan Tanner finally stopped crying, his tear-filled eyes looking at Ethan Tanner and Sophia Lewis. That's not enough. You two have to kiss for me to believe it. Nathan Tanner lifted his head, speaking with an air of authority. Hearing this, Oliver Grant almost dropped his jaw in shock. This little troublemaker, his demands were getting more and more outrageous. He knew his boss's personality well, no matter how much he doted on his child, he would never do something so absurd. Sure enough, Ethan Tanner's face froze. Smack! Caught off guard, Sophia Lewis closed her eyes and kissed the corner of his lips. Nathan Tanner, Mom's not lying to you. Sophia Lewis was about to lose her mind. She had already owed her son too much. If she made him cry again, how could she still call herself his mother? The unexpected kiss left Ethan Tanner utterly astonished. He furrowed his brows, his deep black eyes reflecting a perplexed glint. Hostage. Nathan Tanner's sadness vanished instantly, his star-like eyes curving into crescent moons as he beamed with joy. Oliver Grant's jaw nearly dropped to the floor. Sophia Lewis actually kissed the third young master. And the third young master wasn't even angry. The sun must be rising in the west today. Seeing Oliver Grant's stunned expression, Sophia Lewis suddenly snapped back to reality. Embarrassed, she covered her face, her heart pounding wildly. It seemed that old habits die hard. Even after 4 years, her ambush technique remained as sharp as ever. The next punishment would likely be to have Oliver Grant throw her out. After all, it had happened before. Sophia Lewis never imagined that this kiss would actually make Ethan Tanner so pleased. Fool. At least you're sensible. All the jealousy and resentment from before dissipated like clouds in the sky at this moment. The situation suddenly became clear. Oliver Grant secretly breathed a sigh of relief and quietly gave Nathan Tanner a thumbs up. Nathan Tanner raised his eyebrows smugly and skipped over to Sophia Lewis, grinning brightly. Sophia Lewis's heart softened. She reached out to wipe away the tear at the corner of her son's eye. Seeing her son smile so happily, she thought, even if she had to walk through fire and water, it would all be worth it. Third young master, there's still work at the company. I'll take my leave now. With that, Oliver Grant bolted away, as fast as lightning. A family of 3, with such a harmonious atmosphere, he couldn't stay and be the third wheel. Mom, I'm hungry. Nathan Tanner pouted, looking at Sophia Lewis with anticipation. You weren't home at noon, so Uncle Oliver Grant ordered takeout for me. It was terrible. Really? Sophia Lewis smiled, instinctively reaching out to ruffle her son's hair. Really? Nathan Tanner nodded vigorously. He even said it was from the best restaurant in Riverfield. Even Dad couldn't eat much of it. Mom's cooking is still the best, right, Dad? The boy suddenly turned to Ethan Tanner, catching him off guard. Ethan coughed twice, looking slightly awkward. It was the first time Sophia Lewis had seen Ethan Tanner like this, and the corners of her lips pressed into a faint smile. All right then, why don't you play with Dad for a bit while I go make some fried egg and noodles for both of you? Hooray! Nathan Tanner raised his hands in excitement, cheering loudly while stomping his feet in delight. Looking at Sophia Lewis's figure as she walked into the kitchen, Ethan Tanner pressed his lips together without saying a word. Chapter 21, Going Abroad. Feeling suddenly light-hearted, Sophia Lewis hummed a soft tune and quickly prepared 3 bowls of noodles with fried eggs. Nathan Tanner ate heartily, while Ethan Tanner, though maintaining his cold demeanor, finished his bowl completely. Even the soup that Sophia Lewis fed him, he obediently drank to the last drop. Although the two still didn't talk much, the atmosphere had become much more pleasant. After eating his fill, Nathan Tanner swiftly climbed onto the bed, curling up by Ethan Tanner's feet and falling sound asleep. Sophia Lewis didn't dare to touch the boy casually, so she grabbed a thin blanket and gently covered him. Why did you leave Riverfield? Ethan Tanner suddenly asked coldly. Sophia Lewis froze, biting her lip lightly, and replied in a soft voice, I thought you would hate me very much. Now that the misunderstanding had been resolved, she no longer needed to avoid these issues. You thought? Ethan Tanner frowned. How many other things did you assume? Sophia Lewis swallowed hard and hesitantly said, I also thought that the Lewis Corporation went bankrupt. Because you wanted to take revenge on me, Sophia Lewis's voice grew quieter and quieter, but it didn't stop Ethan Tanner from hearing her words clearly. Do you think I have that much free time? Ethan Tanner's voice turned icy. Sophia Lewis pressed her lips together and said nothing. She had never thought about the reasonableness of this matter, simply believing Emily Lewis's words. Ethan Tanner was so furious he could spit blood. Previously, when he learned that Sophia Lewis wanted to drug him, he even deliberately went to the bar to give her an opportunity. Of course, he didn't drink the wine she handed him, but his momentary infatuation with this woman was real. The rumor that he had slept with Sophia Lewis was actually something he intentionally spread. This way, he wouldn't have to humble himself to confess his feelings, and it would make sense for him to marry her, silencing those who liked to gossip about his past with Diana Sanders. Unexpectedly, just as urgent matters arose in the overseas market, Ethan Tanner left for a few days, and when he returned to Riverfield, everything had completely changed. The Lewis Corporation had gone bankrupt, and Sophia Lewis along with her mother had vanished without a trace. After searching tirelessly for 4 years, he finally found the mother and daughter, only to now be told it was all a misunderstanding. Ethan Tanner truly felt like killing someone. Yes, I'm sorry. Sophia Lewis lowered her head. Sorry? Do you think a simple apology can? Ethan Tanner stopped mid-sentence. He took a deep breath, looking at Nathan Tanner, who was sound asleep at his feet. I admit this was my fault. But you can't just decide on your own to send Nathan Tanner abroad to study by himself. Sophia Lewis raised her voice, disregarding everything. Ethan Tanner slightly raised his sharp eyebrows. Did I ever say I wanted to send Nathan Tanner abroad to study? Hearing this, Sophia Lewis froze in shock. You didn't say it, but you were thinking it. Accidentally betraying Diana Sanders, Sophia Lewis was terrified. That wretched woman, her skill at stirring up trouble was becoming more and more remarkable. Anger surged within him as Ethan Tanner tightly gripped Sophia Lewis's wrist, suppressing his pain, and coldly said, Sophia Lewis, how long are you planning to make up stories? Dad, what's wrong with you? A clear, childish voice cut through Ethan Tanner's words. Sophia Lewis was startled and turned to see Nathan Tanner, now awake, rubbing his sleepy eyes with an innocent expression. Nothing at all. Ethan Tanner quickly released his grip, and Sophia Lewis seized the chance to pull her hand back, smiling at Nathan Tanner. But I just saw you getting mad at Mom, Nathan Tanner pouted. No, you must have been dreaming. Sophia Lewis winked repeatedly at Ethan Tanner. Right, Ethan? Yes, that's right. Ethan Tanner's face darkened, looking visibly uneasy. But I heard someone saying they wanted to take me abroad. Nathan Tanner's eyes widened with determination. I'm not so young that I'd imagine things. Nathan Tanner, I do plan to take you abroad. Ethan Tanner deliberately paused, his cold gaze sweeping over Sophia Lewis, to visit your grandmother. She's recovering overseas and can't come back right now. What? Sophia Lewis froze upon hearing this. Wow, going abroad. Is Mom coming too? Nathan Tanner exclaimed excitedly, scrambling over to Ethan Tanner. Of course. Ethan Tanner replied slowly, emphasizing each word as if he intended them for someone specific. Sophia Lewis was flustered. Why was this different from what she had heard from Diana Sanders? Ethan Tanner wouldn't lie about this to her and Nathan Tanner, which left only one possibility: Diana Sanders had deceived her. But why would she do that? Sophia Lewis suddenly recalled the mysteriously appearing map. Her breathing quickened. It was Diana Sanders who told me you wanted to send Nathan Tanner abroad to study. Sophia Lewis gritted her teeth, deciding to speak decisively. This matter involved the safety of both her and Nathan Tanner. She couldn't let it slide. Diana Sanders? Ethan Tanner was stunned, his expression slightly changing. I'm not lying. It's true. Ethan Tanner's silence made Sophia Lewis anxious, her eyes glistening with tears. Indeed, she used to speak ill of Diana Sanders in the past, but that was all behind her now. Mom, why are you crying? Nathan Tanner hurriedly ran past Ethan Tanner. His short legs weren't long enough, and the boy accidentally stepped on Ethan's sensitive spot. Ethan Tanner's face twisted in pain as he glared resentfully at Nathan Tanner. However, Nathan seemed completely unaware of Ethan's unusual expression, as all his attention was focused on Sophia Lewis. Did Dad bully you just now? Nathan Tanner stood in front of Sophia Lewis, gently stroking her cheek. No, he didn't. Sophia Lewis quickly shook her head, fearing another misunderstanding. It's just that I remembered some unhappy things from the past. Oh, that's good then. Nathan Tanner sighed in relief. So, when can we visit Grandma? Tomorrow, Ethan Tanner replied slowly. So soon? Sophia Lewis blurted out. But what about your injury? There will be medical staff with us. It's fine. Ethan Tanner coldly interrupted her. But I don't have any identification documents. Sophia Lewis's face fell in dismay. Do you think there's anything I can't handle? Ethan Tanner clearly didn't want to continue the conversation. Sophia Lewis thought for a moment and stayed silent. By now, night had fallen. Sophia Lewis packed a few simple belongings and took Nathan Tanner to visit Margaret Young's hospital room. Margaret Young was still lying quietly on the bed, her body connected to various medical devices. Sophia Lewis stood frozen, staring at her mother's snow-white hair. Her nose stung as she fought back the urge to cry. If only she hadn't acted impulsively before, would the outcome have been different? She wondered. Mom, please wait for me. Sophia Lewis smiled faintly. Little did she know, after this trip, the trajectory of her life would change completely. Chapter 22, What's yours? Don't even think about taking it. Early the next morning, Oliver Grant hurriedly rushed over. Last night, he had planned to sneak away for a lazy sleep-in, but ended up receiving a call from Ethan Tanner, which felt like being kicked straight from heaven to hell. This demanding boss actually required him to arrange everything within 8 hours to fly to Northern Europe. Yes, this decision was made on a whim by Ethan Tanner, right after Nathan Tanner asked him about it. And just like that, the decision was finalized. Of course, when the boss speaks, subordinates have to hustle. Suddenly handed such a major task, Oliver Grant was so busy he felt like he might cough up blood. But fortunately, everything was sorted out smoothly. Third young master, the arrangements at the airport have been completed. Our flight can take off at 10 o'clock, so we need to leave a bit earlier. Oliver Grant reported to Ethan Tanner while helping to load the luggage. Sophia Lewis wanted to help but was politely declined by Oliver Grant, leaving her watching helplessly as he busied himself like a whirlwind. Ethan Tanner was a highly skeptical person. Only those he trusted absolutely were allowed to be involved in his daily life. It was hard to say whether Oliver Grant was lucky to have been chosen or unlucky to bear the burden. Once everything was ready, Oliver Grant called for medical staff to assist in moving Ethan Tanner's hospital bed into the modified commercial vehicle. Meanwhile, Sophia Lewis and Nathan Tanner were arranged to ride in a car following behind Oliver Grant. As the mother and son got into their car, Ethan Tanner suddenly called out, "Get Diana Sanders to meet us at the VIP lounge at the airport." "Understood." Oliver Grant nodded respectfully. It was normal for work to be delegated before departure. At this moment, Sophia Lewis felt a bit uneasy. She was already nervous before even boarding the plane. "Mom, what kind of person is Grandma?" Nathan Tanner looked up with his small face, asking curiously. She's a very kind person." Sophia Lewis thought for a moment, a warm feeling rising in her heart. If she remembered correctly, Ethan Tanner's mother was Eleanor Lewis, who must be around 70 years old now. Ethan Tanner was the third child. Originally, there was also a second brother, but unfortunately, he passed away at a young age. Eleanor Lewis gave birth to Ethan Tanner when she was over 40 years old. In truth, Eleanor Lewis was very kind to Sophia Lewis and very much approved of her as a daughter-in-law. After all, the two families had been close for generations, and she had watched Sophia Lewis grow up. However, many years had passed, and Sophia was no longer the same person she used to be. She wasn't sure if Eleanor Lewis would still accept her. The car quickly arrived at the airport, and under the escort of a group of people, they proceeded grandly into the VIP lounge. Sophia Lewis was playing with Nathan Tanner in the children's area. While she was entirely focused on her son, she didn't notice Diana Sanders walking past behind her with a jealous glare. "Ethan, I've been looking for you." Diana Sanders beamed as she entered Ethan Tanner's lounge. Today, she had deliberately dressed like she did 4 years ago, hoping to rekindle Ethan Tanner's memories. "Director Sanders, this isn't a personal moment. I think it's better if you address me as CEO Tanner," Ethan Tanner said indifferently, his tone distant and cold. Diana Sanders was deeply disappointed but tried to remain composed, nodding slightly. "Yes, CEO Tanner. I've reached an agreement with Dave, the CEO of Westman Group. During this trip to Northern Europe, besides visiting my mother, I'll also meet Dave to finalize the luxury goods project." "You're not taking me with you?" Diana Sanders asked anxiously. "I've been handling this project all along, and Dave, no need." Ethan Tanner interrupted her with a shake of his head. "All the details have been settled. I'm only going there to sign the contract." Diana Sanders bit her lip and fell silent. If he were going alone, that would be one thing, but why was he bringing that woman along? She couldn't accept it. "At the villa, did you say anything to Sophia Lewis?" Ethan Tanner suddenly changed the subject, narrowing his eyes as he looked at her. Diana Sanders was startled. "CEO Tanner, I don't understand what you mean," she said, feigning confusion. "I only took Sophia to the room and talked about the interior decor. Is there a problem?" Ethan Tanner hesitated for a moment before shaking his head firmly. "No. I'll be in Northern Europe for about 5 days. If anything comes up, I'll contact you directly." "Understood," Diana Sanders replied with a forced smile, though her heart was bleeding inside. "You may leave now," Ethan Tanner said, closing his eyes, signaling he didn't want to be disturbed. Diana Sanders felt a pang of sadness. She opened her mouth as if to say something but held back, eventually turning and leaving the room. The moment the door closed, she quietly clenched her fists tightly. For 4 years, Ethan Tanner's attitude toward her remained indifferent. Every time she tried to express her feelings, she was flatly rejected. She even humbled herself, standing completely bare before him, only to receive a cold remark, "Don't do this." Was it truly impossible to turn back time? She refused to believe it. What was hers, no one else could take away. Taking out her phone, she dialed Lillian Gray's number. "Hello, Lillian, about what you mentioned last time, I want to seriously reconsider." Diana Sanders spoke as she walked out, her graceful figure quickly disappearing beyond the doorway. Sophia Lewis, feeling bored, had dozed off, but a sudden chill down her spine startled her awake. At that moment, Oliver Grant approached, gesturing for her to come over. Sophia Lewis understood and nodded, quickly pulling Nathan Tanner along to follow Oliver. Soon after, Ethan Tanner was also escorted out. The 4 of them, along with a few medical staff, boarded the private jet safely. The modified Airbus A330 cabin was exceptionally spacious. Besides rows of genuine coffee brown leather sofas, there was also a bar, massage chairs, and more, making it feel like a miniature amusement park. "Wow, Mommy, look at the plane. Why is it just us?" Nathan Tanner exclaimed, his excitement palpable as it was his first time flying. He had only seen airplane cabins on TV and had no idea how different a private jet was from a commercial one. Sophia Lewis smiled warmly, gently explaining to her son. After the plane took off and stabilized, the mother and son enjoyed gazing at the sky outside together, their radiant smiles lighting up the moment. On the other side, Ethan Tanner was being examined by the doctor, but his eyes were fixed on Sophia Lewis. The more he looked, the gentler his expression became. He probably hadn't even noticed this subtle change himself, but Oliver Grant standing nearby caught it clearly, smirking to himself. Springtime had finally arrived for the 3rd young master. It wasn't easy. He almost wanted to set off fireworks to celebrate. A 10-hour flight wasn't short, but luckily, the spacious cabin allowed the little boy to run around freely. However, after playing for a while, Nathan Tanner started to grow bored. "Mommy, how much longer until we arrive?" "Almost there." This conversation repeated at least 10 times, driving Sophia Lewis nearly mad, leaving her with no energy to enjoy the scenery anymore. Chapter 23, The Turbulent Horror. "Nathan, do you want to take a nap?" Sophia Lewis tentatively asked. "I'm not sleepy." Nathan Tanner shook his head. "Mom, why does the plane fly so high? And why do the clouds in the sky look different from the ones on the ground? Here we go again, here we go again." Sophia Lewis nearly felt like losing her mind. Since boarding the plane, Nathan had been asking one question after another. At first, it was manageable, as Ethan Tanner patiently answered. But after 2 hours of relentless questioning, even he couldn't take it anymore and used the excuse of needing to change his medication to escape Nathan's barrage. Oliver Grant was even craftier. The moment he sensed trouble, he pretended to fall asleep, clutching his arms. Sophia, on the other hand, was clueless about astronomy. Faced with Nathan's questions, she genuinely didn't know how to respond. "Nathan," Sophia Lewis licked her lips. "Well, before she could finish her sentence, the plane suddenly shook violently. Sophia Lewis screamed in terror, instinctively pulling Nathan tightly into her arms. Oliver Grant immediately shot up from his seat. Without waiting for Ethan Tanner's command, he dashed toward the cockpit. The plane continued to shudder, with the turbulence seemingly intensifying. Sophia clung to Nathan, repeatedly comforting him, "Don't be scared, don't be scared. Mom, as long as you and Dad are here, I'm not afraid." Nathan smiled at her. Across from them, Ethan Tanner silently observed the mother and son, his eyes reflecting a hint of concern. Not long after, Oliver Grant returned, his expression extremely grave. "The captain said we've encountered a rare air current." Despite his military background, his voice trembled in the face of imminent danger. This current suddenly changed direction. "The captain said he's never experienced anything like this before." Oliver hesitated, leaving the rest unsaid. The captain of this flight had over 30 years of experience. The fact that even he had never encountered such a situation underscored the severity of the danger. At that moment, the plane jolted violently again. Bottles of wine from the bar crashed to the floor, shattering with a piercing sound of glass breaking. Drinks and snacks scattered across the cabin, plunging the spacious aircraft into chaos. Medical staff hurriedly secured Ethan Tanner's hospital bed. Oliver Grant quickly restrained his limbs to prevent him from being thrown out. Sophia Lewis, deeply worried, repeatedly checked Nathan's seatbelt, holding him tightly without letting go. Suddenly, the aircraft's body jolted again. A nurse holding the floor stand failed to keep her grip, causing it to topple toward Ethan Tanner. "Dad!" Nathan Tanner screamed in panic. Without hesitation, he unfastened his seatbelt, pushed Sophia Lewis's hands away, and dashed to shield Ethan Tanner. "Nathan Tanner!" Sophia Lewis did not hesitate to run after him. The floor stand was set upright again. A scratch had appeared on Ethan Tanner's forehead. "Dad, are you okay?" Nathan Tanner tightly gripped the hospital bed railing, his face filled with worry. "Young master, quickly go back to your seat, this place is dang." Before Oliver Grant could finish his sentence, the plane sharply tilted to the right. He hurriedly picked Nathan Tanner up, placed him into Ethan Tanner's arms, and swiftly grabbed Sophia Lewis, pulling her back forcefully. At this moment, returning to their seats was no longer an option. Oliver Grant immediately pulled out the emergency seatbelt, securing himself and Sophia Lewis along with her child to a fixed point behind Ethan Tanner. Even in death, he was determined to stay with his boss's family. "Dad, does it hurt?" Nathan Tanner gently touched the wound on Ethan Tanner's forehead. Ethan Tanner said nothing, only holding Nathan tightly with one arm. The plane continued to shake violently. No matter how strong one's will might be, it was difficult to avoid feeling vulnerable at this moment. The suffocating feeling of being close to death engulfed Sophia Lewis. She wanted to cry but couldn't. All she could do was tightly clutch her son's leg, her inner defenses completely shattered. Grief enveloped the entire cabin. A few accompanying nurses could no longer hold back and burst into tears. Even the elderly doctor, who was over 50, quietly wiped away his tears. "Mom, are we going to die?" Nathan Tanner asked, his innocent eyes wide open, his face full of confusion. Sophia Lewis choked up. She opened her mouth but couldn't bring herself to answer. "It's okay, we'll be fine." Ethan Tanner comforted gently, though his usual commanding presence had vanished. Yes, in the face of death, who could truly remain calm? "Mom, do you know what my birthday wish has been every year?" Nathan Tanner suddenly turned around, looking at Sophia Lewis with sincere eyes. Sophia Lewis, her heart heavy, shook her head slightly. Every year on Nathan Tanner's birthday, she would buy a small birthday cake, but the boy never revealed his wish to her. I wish to reunite with Dad soon, for our family to always be happy and joyful together. Nathan Tanner smiled as he said this, his large, beautiful eyes tinged with a hint of sadness. Sophia Lewis's heart ached. She tried her best to move closer to Nathan Tanner, hugging him tightly from behind, her hands resting on Ethan Tanner's back. The two of them stood like a protective wall, shielding Nathan Tanner in the middle. Though unspoken, at this moment, perhaps they both shared the same wish. Even if there was only a sliver of hope for survival, they would dedicate it to their child. The plane shook more and more violently, causing the medical staff to stumble and sway. Oliver Grant continuously communicated with the captain via the intercom, but only received vague responses. Sophia Lewis was desperate. If she hadn't listened to Emily Lewis's persuasion, she wouldn't have left Ethan Tanner, nor would she have boarded this fateful flight. She regretted it deeply, profoundly. And there were words that, if not spoken now, might never have the chance to be said again. Ethan Tanner, I love you. Separated by Nathan Tanner's head, Sophia Lewis spoke each word clearly and distinctly. The man turned his head swiftly, tilting up to claim her lips. This kiss was fiery and passionate, yet carried an indescribable sorrow. This, it seemed, was his answer. Sophia Lewis could no longer hold back, tears streamed down her face. She had imagined countless times the scene of Ethan Tanner kissing her while fully conscious. But she never expected it to happen under such circumstances. She wanted so badly to ask him why he liked her, when it all began. Unfortunately, it seemed there might be no more chances. If they could survive, she vowed never to let go of Ethan Tanner, not in this life, not ever. The plane jolted like a sieve, making her head spin, the turbulence growing more intense. Sophia Lewis felt like she was about to be flung into the air, instinctively clutching Nathan Tanner and Ethan Tanner tightly. Just as everyone thought the plane was about to crash, miraculously, it suddenly stabilized. Could it be that they were about to die? She unconsciously pressed her lips harder against Ethan Tanner's, kissing him even more fervently. What? We've cleared the turbulence? We're safe. Oliver Grant's voice suddenly rang out beside her, snapping Sophia Lewis out of her daze. She quickly pulled away from his lips. Chapter 24, Aren't you mad at me? We're safe now, we're safe. Oliver Grant raised the radio, shouting excitedly. Everyone cheered joyfully, while Sophia Lewis seemed to have transformed, her body turning limp as she collapsed onto a seat. Ethan Tanner pressed his lips together, savoring the lingering scent of Sophia Lewis. The relief of surviving the accident was nothing compared to the overwhelming happiness of hearing her confession. For the first time, Ethan Tanner understood what it felt like to have his heart bloom with joy. The plane, which had been shaking violently earlier, was now so smooth that it gave Sophia Lewis the illusion that everything that had just happened was merely a dream. Mom, did you and Dad just kiss? Nathan Tanner's face turned as red as a ripe apple, having been tightly held during the turbulence. Sophia Lewis blushed furiously, quickly unbuckled her seatbelt, and retreated to the sofa she had been sitting on earlier. Once she calmed down and recalled her actions, Sophia Lewis wished she could just vanish. Dad, why is Mom so embarrassed? Nathan Tanner pouted, You're both adults, why be shy? Nathan Tanner's words made Ethan Tanner's heart melt. Smiling tenderly, he lovingly ruffled his son's hair. Oliver Grant, sharp as ever, only needed one glance to notice the shift in his boss's demeanor. Surviving a close call surely brings blessings later, he mused silently. After that, the plane encountered no more turbulence and landed smoothly at the Nordic airport. Throughout the journey, Sophia Lewis didn't say another word to Ethan Tanner, as if the words, "I love you," had drained all her courage. Ethan Tanner, on the other hand, was in an excellent mood. Even when a nurse accidentally made him bleed, he didn't flinch. The happiest person, of course, was Nathan Tanner. Sophia Lewis's confession was crystal clear to the young boy. It turned out he truly was the product of love. What could be more wonderful than that? Ethan Tanner was transferred to a wheelchair, pushed by Oliver Grant as they exited the plane. Sophia Lewis held Nathan Tanner's hand, following behind, her heart still restless. At this moment, however, her anxiety had shifted from the fear of confessing to the nervousness of soon meeting Eleanor Lewis. A group of foreigners with blonde hair and blue eyes was waiting outside the airport. Oliver Grant conversed with them fluently in English, after which the entire group was ushered into the same business vehicle. The vehicle was spacious, with Sophia Lewis and Ethan Tanner seated opposite each other. Sophia Lewis dared not lift her head to look at Ethan Tanner, instead absent-mindedly playing with Nathan Tanner's chubby little hands. "Daddy, do you think Grandma will like me?" Nathan Tanner asked eagerly, tilting his head. "What do you think?" Ethan Tanner replied with a faint smile. Nathan Tanner thought for a moment and said, "I think she will. After all, I look just like you did when you were little." In truth, Nathan Tanner was very excited to meet his grandmother. Although he had a maternal grandmother, she had been in a coma since his birth, and he had never experienced the love of a grandparent. Northern Europe wasn't very large. Within less than half an hour, they had arrived at a hospital in the city center from the airport. Compared to the surrounding buildings, the hospital was quite large and designed in an open garden style. Inside, there weren't many people, most of whom were elderly individuals over 70. Sophia Lewis followed Oliver Grant through a lily-filled corridor. From a distance, she spotted an elderly woman with silver hair sitting in a wheelchair, chatting with a blonde nurse beside her. Though aged, the woman's delicate features were still apparent. Comparing her to Ethan Tanner, there was indeed a striking resemblance of 7 to 8 parts. Sophia Lewis's heart grew even more nervous, and she unconsciously slowed her pace. "Mom!" Ethan Tanner called softly, catching Eleanor Lewis's attention. "You're here!" Eleanor Lewis exclaimed joyfully, signaling the nurse to wheel her closer to Ethan Tanner. "Are you badly injured?" Eleanor Lewis frowned, carefully examining Ethan Tanner. Ethan Tanner said nothing, only shaking his head gently. The men of the Tanner family have always been brave. As long as there's no loss of limbs or life-threatening danger, the family doesn't worry too much, so Eleanor Lewis didn't seem overly concerned. "Dad, is she my grandmother?" At this moment, Nathan Tanner peeked his small head out from behind Ethan Tanner's wheelchair. "Yes, I am your grandmother." Seeing Nathan Tanner, Eleanor Lewis immediately beamed with joy. Previously, she had only seen photos of Nathan Tanner sent by Oliver Grant. Meeting him today, he indeed looked very much like a young Ethan Tanner. "Hello, Grandma. My name is Nathan Tanner." Nathan Tanner stepped forward politely and introduced himself to Eleanor Lewis. "Yes, I know. Eleanor Lewis nodded repeatedly, her eyes glistening with tears. Unexpectedly gaining such a well-behaved and adorable grandson made her heart overflow with happiness. Sophia Lewis quietly watched Eleanor Lewis smile with tears in her eyes, feeling a pang of sadness in her heart. Although the Lewis and Tanner families weren't exactly lifelong allies, they were very close. It could be said that Eleanor Lewis had watched Sophia Lewis grow up. In the past, Eleanor Lewis had wholeheartedly wanted Sophia Lewis to become her daughter-in-law. She even went as far as announcing an arranged marriage between the two families at a birthday party without Ethan Tanner's consent. As a result, Ethan Tanner left the event in anger, leaving Eleanor Lewis speechless with frustration. But this also showed how much she wanted Sophia Lewis as her daughter-in-law. Sophia Lewis understood Eleanor Lewis's good intentions. However, the commotion from back then had embarrassed the Tanner family, and she felt guilty toward Eleanor Lewis. At this moment, Eleanor Lewis suddenly looked up at Sophia Lewis. Their eyes met, and Sophia froze before quickly lowering her head. "Sophia, come here." Hearing Eleanor Lewis's gentle call, Sophia's back stiffened. Clenching her teeth, she slowly stepped forward. Eleanor Lewis gently held Sophia Lewis's right hand, softly stroking the thin calluses on her fingertips before letting out a heavy sigh after a long pause. "You silly girl, why did you do that back then?" Such a simple sentence caused Sophia Lewis's nose to sting and her eyes to redden. I'm sorry," Sophia Lewis choked out. "You foolish child, why are you apologizing to me? It's the Tanner family that owes you an apology." Eleanor Lewis murmured, her gaze shifting to Nathan Tanner. "Raising the child all on your own until now, it must have been so hard for you." Sophia Lewis opened her mouth but couldn't find the words to speak, only shaking her head repeatedly. She hadn't expected Eleanor Lewis to forgive her so quickly, or rather, to have never held any resentment at all. "I heard about your mother's situation from Oliver Grant as well. There are top specialists here, and I'll arrange for them to visit Riverfield to examine your mother. Perhaps things might improve." Eleanor Lewis's words only deepened Sophia Lewis's guilt. "Aunt Eleanor, do you really not blame me?" Sophia Lewis bit her lip gently. "Why would I blame you? Young people, after all, can be impulsive when it comes to love. That's perfectly normal." Eleanor Lewis's tone was unusually gentle before she turned to glare at Ethan Tanner. "If it weren't for Ethan, who could have just accepted you earlier, none of this would have happened." Chapter 25, The Wedding Ceremony. Facing Eleanor Lewis's reproachful gaze, Ethan Tanner had no choice but to avert his eyes, pretending not to notice. If only he had known things would turn out this way, he certainly wouldn't have acted as he did. "Well, I've been here recuperating year-round. It seems unlikely I'll ever return to Riverfield," Eleanor Lewis said, her eyes briefly revealing a trace of sorrow before she let out a heavy sigh. "It hasn't been easy for you two to come here. I think, while everyone's present, we should take care of what needs to be done." "Mother, what do you mean by that?" Ethan Tanner was clearly confused. Eleanor Lewis didn't answer. Instead, she lifted her head to look past Sophia Lewis and suddenly smiled. "Here they come." A man resembling a pastor, holding a Bible, approached Eleanor Lewis with a bright smile. Behind him were several young people, some carrying tables and others wooden stands. In no time, a simple floral arch was erected before them, with a tall table placed beneath it. The pastor then laid out several sheets of paper neatly on both sides of the table. The nurse from earlier stepped forward and placed a flower crown on Sophia Lewis's head. "All right, let's begin." Eleanor Lewis nodded at the pastor. "Ethan, Sophia, Nathan is already this grown. You two should give the child a proper family name. I also want to witness this beautiful moment. That's why I prepared all of this." Today, the two of you should hold your wedding ceremony right here. Marriage? A real wedding? Sophia Lewis was completely stunned. She hadn't expected Eleanor Lewis to pull such a move. In contrast, Ethan Tanner appeared unusually calm. Though surprised, the thought of escaping the troubles of Riverfield and forming a lifelong bond with Sophia Lewis in this foreign land didn't seem like a bad idea. "Mom, this is amazing!" Nathan Tanner exclaimed joyfully, tugging at her hand. "I can finally see you and Dad get married with my own eyes." "Miss, this way please," the pastor gestured forward, speaking in fluent English. Sophia Lewis was utterly flustered, frozen in place and unable to respond. Nathan Tanner quickly grabbed her hand and led her to stand beneath the floral arch. Then, Oliver Grant wheeled Ethan Tanner to stand opposite Sophia Lewis. Sophia Lewis was overwhelmed with panic, but when she saw Ethan Tanner's calm expression, she froze in place. Was he agreeing to this? Recalling the passionate kiss on the plane, Sophia Lewis's face grew hot. The pastor, muttering prayers, took water from a basin and sprinkled it over the two of them. "All right, you may exchange the rings now," the minister smiled and nodded. As soon as he finished speaking, someone brought over the ring box. Sophia Lewis picked up the groom's ring, but her nerves got the better of her, leaving her unsure of what to do next. Ethan Tanner extended his hand, frowning impatiently. "Hurry up." Suppressing her wildly beating heart, Sophia Lewis carefully slid the ring onto Ethan Tanner's ring finger. The ring fit perfectly, its silver band gleaming with a stunning light. Combined with her slender, fair fingers, the sight was as beautiful as a painting. Just as Sophia Lewis was lost in admiration, Ethan Tanner picked up the bride's ring and gently lifted her left hand. The smooth silver ring slid onto her ring finger effortlessly, fitting perfectly in place. Before she could fully savor the sweet moment, the minister cleared his throat softly, signaling them to sign the papers on the table. Still floating in happiness, Sophia Lewis didn't take a close look and simply picked up the pen to sign her name. "I now pronounce this ceremony successfully completed," the minister declared loudly, raising both hands. Although there were only a few attendees, the applause was enthusiastic, especially from Oliver Grant and Nathan Tanner, whose small hands clapped until they turned red. "Grandma, what are they signing?" Nathan Tanner asked curiously. "Of course, it's the marriage certificate," Eleanor Lewis replied cheerfully. "But isn't the marriage certificate supposed to be a red book? Why does this one look different?" Nathan Tanner asked, his face filled with confusion. Hearing her grandson's question, Eleanor Lewis's smile grew even brighter. "This is the foreign version of a marriage certificate, and it's legally valid just the same. But I still think the red book is the real deal." Nathan Tanner pouted, his young face showing clear disappointment. All right. If our little Nathan wants the red book, I'll arrange for one." With that, she called Oliver Grant over and gave him some instructions. For the Tanner family, arranging a marriage certificate was as simple as making a phone call. As soon as Eleanor Lewis gave the instructions, Oliver Grant immediately sent the message. Without needing a joint photo, within 5 minutes, a bright red book was ready. Efficiency and decisiveness were Oliver Grant's trademarks. Little did he know, this seemingly ordinary action of his would bind Ethan Tanner and Sophia Lewis together with an unbreakable tie. "It's done, let's go home now," Eleanor Lewis said with a cheerful smile. The so-called home Eleanor referred to was right next to the hospital. It was a three-story European-style villa that, despite its age, still exuded elegance. "I've already had your room prepared. Put your belongings down and come downstairs for dinner," Eleanor Lewis said with a smile. A few blonde maids helped carry the luggage to the second floor. It seemed they had coordinated beforehand, as they placed Ethan Tanner and Sophia Lewis's belongings in the same room, while Nathan Tanner's things were taken to the third floor. Wait. Sophia Lewis hurriedly stammered in broken English, Why is the child's room on the third floor? This is the arrangement of the madam. One of the maids shrugged, as if Sophia's question was ridiculous. Sophia Lewis turned to look at the 2-meter-wide double bed in the room and quietly swallowed hard. "Dad, let's go eat." Nathan Tanner, now changed, cheerfully ran over. Sophia Lewis stood at the door, seemingly with no intention of stepping inside. Ethan Tanner frowned slightly, a hint of displeasure flashing in his eyes. It was Oliver Grant who acted quickly, pulling Sophia Lewis behind Ethan Tanner with a smile and saying, "Madam, I officially leave the task of pushing the wheelchair to you." "Madam?" Hearing this form of address, the corner of Sophia Lewis's mouth twitched. She would much rather be called Miss Lewis, that sounded far better. The innocent yet mischievous expression on Sophia Lewis's face seemed to soften Ethan Tanner's anger. The lively, spirited girl he remembered appeared to have returned. "All right then, let's go." Sophia Lewis gripped the wheelchair handles firmly, accompanying Oliver Grant and Ethan Tanner as they took the elevator down to the first floor. By then, the dining room on the first floor was ready. The long rectangular table was filled with local delicacies. "Nathan, come here to Grandma." Eleanor Lewis called out to Nathan Tanner with a cheerful smile. Nathan Tanner let out a delighted cry and ran over, seating himself beside Eleanor Lewis. "Here, try this, and this one's delicious too." "Thank you, Grandma. You should eat some too." While one side of the table was warm and lively, the other side was cold and awkward. Sophia Lewis and Ethan Tanner sat next to each other, yet neither spoke a word. Hadn't they just shared heartfelt conversations on the plane? Hadn't they willingly signed the marriage certificate at the wedding? Every sign pointed to them being in love, so why did they seem so uncomfortable now? Oliver Grant felt like he was going to lose his mind. He couldn't figure out where things had gone wrong. "Mom, why aren't you feeding Dad?" Nathan Tanner, happily chatting with Eleanor Lewis, suddenly noticed the odd atmosphere. He frowned slightly. "Dad's still hungry." Sophia Lewis snapped out of her daze, suddenly remembering that she was still Ethan Tanner's personal caregiver. Awkwardly, she put down her knife and fork, grabbed a slice of sandwich, and brought it to Ethan Tanner's mouth. "I don't want this." Ethan Tanner turned his head away, his face full of disdain. Then I'll cut you a piece of steak." Sophia Lewis's face flushed bright red. "I don't eat cold food." "Then, how about some pumpkin soup?" "The color is disgusting, I won't drink it." Ethan Tanner's cold words completely contrasted with Sophia Lewis's timid demeanor, drawing Eleanor Lewis's attention. She had been engrossed in admiring Nathan Tanner's appearance but now noticed the odd tension between them. "Nathan, what's going on with your parents?" Eleanor Lewis quietly observed while softly asking. Nathan Tanner pouted, his big round eyes filled with helplessness. "I have no idea. Sometimes they get along, sometimes they don't. Maybe it's one of those, the more you love, the more you fight, situations." "Where did you learn such phrases?" Eleanor Lewis chuckled. From Uncle Wong at the grocery store next door. He always says that. Nathan Tanner grinned. Chapter 26, 3 people, 1 bed. After a hearty meal, Sophia Lewis took Nathan Tanner to the garden to catch butterflies. Eleanor Lewis and Ethan Tanner sat side by side, their gentle gazes following Nathan Tanner. "Ethan, how's Serena doing lately?" Speaking of her eldest daughter, Eleanor Lewis's expression turned slightly stern. "She's the same as always, enjoying traveling everywhere with her husband," Ethan Tanner sighed. "Humph, she's still a member of the board of directors. She doesn't care at all about the company's operations. And that Richard Gray, keep an eye on him." Eleanor Lewis frowned. "As for his twins, just assign them some random positions, but under no circumstances should they be placed in any of the company's core departments." "Mom, I understand," Ethan Tanner nodded slightly. "The CG Corporation is the result of 3 generations of the Tanner family's hard work, so naturally, it cannot be tainted by outsiders. 2 years ago, Richard Gray used the excuse that Serena was childless to bring his twins from his previous marriage into the Tanner household, and he endured it. Later, Richard suggested placing the Gray siblings into the company, and for Serena's happiness, he endured again. But now, that son dared to have designs on Sophia. This time, he could no longer tolerate it. After playing for a while, Sophia Lewis took Nathan Tanner upstairs to bathe and change him into his robot-themed pajamas. Nathan Tanner was overjoyed. "Nathan Tanner, can Mommy sleep with you tonight?" Sophia Lewis couldn't bear the thought of sharing a bed with Ethan Tanner, so she decided to turn to her son. "I don't want to." To her surprise, Nathan Tanner rejected her outright. "This is my room, I want to sleep alone." "Nathan Tanner, you don't want to sleep with Mommy?" Sophia Lewis wasn't ready to give up. "I don't want to, not at all, not even a little," Nathan Tanner declared firmly. "Sophia Lewis, Mommy, is it because you don't want to sleep with Daddy?" Nathan Tanner's stubborn expression suddenly turned worried. "Are you and Daddy not getting along?" "No." Sophia Lewis was startled and quickly waved her hands. "Mommy and Daddy are doing just fine." "Then why do you insist on sleeping with me?" Nathan Tanner puffed his cheeks in frustration. "It's your wedding banquet, shouldn't you be close with Daddy?" "Where did you learn these words?" Sophia Lewis asked, both amused and helpless. "From Mrs. Judy next door." Sophia Lewis had no choice but to give up. She sighed, stood up to turn off the bedside lamp, and gently closed the door behind her. Unexpectedly, as soon as Sophia Lewis left, Nathan Tanner jumped out of bed. After making sure his mother was gone, he confidently knocked on Oliver Grant's door. "Young master, is something the matter?" Exhausted from the day, Oliver Grant had just been about to take a quick nap when Nathan Tanner called him out. Nathan Tanner looked up at Oliver Grant with a very serious expression. "Uncle Oliver Grant, are my parents really not getting along?" Hearing this, Oliver Grant was startled, his sleepiness instantly vanishing. How should he explain this to the boy? Oliver Grant pondered. "Young master." He crouched down to meet Nathan Tanner's eye level. "Your dad loves your mom very much, and your mom loves your dad too. It's just that they haven't seen each other for a long time, so they're a bit shy. Give it some time, and everything will be fine." "Seeing each other?" Nathan Tanner blinked and asked, "Like when they kissed on the plane today?" Oliver Grant was at a loss for words. The boy seemed to have misunderstood him, but in this situation, it was close enough. Sort of, something like that. Oliver Grant hesitantly nodded. Hearing this, Nathan Tanner's eyes lit up. He hugged Oliver Grant's neck and planted a loud kiss on his cheek. Thank you, Uncle Oliver Grant. I know what to do now. With that, the boy dashed off like a gust of wind. Oliver Grant shook his head with a wry smile. He could only hope Nathan Tanner could make something happen so he wouldn't have to be stuck in the middle, taking hits from both sides. Meanwhile, Sophia Lewis stood dazed, staring at the water flowing from the showerhead. As soon as she entered the room, she didn't dare look at Ethan Tanner. She hurriedly grabbed her nightgown and rushed into the bathroom. But avoidance was only temporary. How would she face him later? Daddy. She faintly heard Nathan Tanner's voice. Why aren't you asleep yet? Son, you're here. Sophia Lewis exclaimed joyfully. She quickly turned off the shower, put on her nightgown, and stepped out of the bathroom. Nathan Tanner was standing in front of Ethan Tanner, hugging a yellow B-shaped pillow with a pitiful expression. Nathan Tanner, you're not asleep yet? She asked gently. No, Mom. Nathan Tanner nodded. I'm scared being alone in such a big room. Then. I want to sleep with Mom and Dad. Nathan Tanner looked up, flashing a bright and confident smile. Better if he hadn't come. Sophia Lewis sighed inwardly. Ethan Tanner didn't react at all to Nathan Tanner's declaration. Since his back was turned to Sophia Lewis, she couldn't tell what expression he had at the moment. Nathan Tanner, your dad isn't used to sharing a bed with anyone. How about I sleep with you instead? Sophia Lewis smiled softly. Really? Dad? Nathan Tanner turned to Ethan Tanner for confirmation. On this point, Sophia Lewis was very confident. After all, decades of habits aren't easily changed. Who said that? Ethan Tanner frowned slightly, as if he hadn't heard what Sophia Lewis just said. Mom did. Nathan Tanner pointed at Sophia Lewis. Don't listen to her nonsense. Ethan Tanner's voice deepened. Sophia Lewis. She wasn't speaking nonsense. Ethan Tanner always booked an entire floor when staying at hotels for business trips. Even during naps at the office, he'd have Oliver Grant clear out everyone nearby. That's an undeniable fact. Mom, do you really not want to stay with me and Dad? Nathan Tanner walked up to her, looking up with clear, starry eyes now clouded with hurt. What? Sophia Lewis was momentarily stunned. What does he mean by me and Dad? This little guy was siding with Ethan Tanner, wasn't he? I'm sorry, Mom. It's my fault. I shouldn't make things difficult for you. Nathan Tanner's voice grew softer, his eyes welling up with tears. You silly boy, what are you saying? Sophia Lewis's defenses completely crumbled. She couldn't bear seeing Nathan Tanner cry. You're not making it hard for me. I don't think that way at all. Mom! Nathan Tanner exclaimed emotionally, hugging Sophia Lewis's waist. So, you agree, right? Agree to what? Oh, amazing! I finally get to sleep with Mom and Dad. Without waiting for Sophia Lewis to respond, Nathan Tanner eagerly climbed onto the large bed, sprawling out with a look of utter satisfaction. Feeling a chill in her heart, Sophia Lewis thought carefully. It seemed like she had no way out now. Well, sharing the bed it is. After all, with their son lying in the middle, nothing should happen, right? Nathan Tanner rolled back and forth on the big bed, clearly excited. Mom, you'll sleep here, and Dad will sleep over there, okay? Nathan Tanner commanded like a little general, exuding authority as he arranged the sleeping positions. "All right, I'll listen to you." Sophia Lewis smiled. "Mom, turn off the lights." Nathan Tanner blinked his eyes. Sophia Lewis nodded and reached out to turn off the bedside lamp. The room was enveloped in darkness, with only the faint glow of moonlight streaming in through the window. The three of them shared a single blanket. Even with Nathan Tanner acting as a barrier, Sophia Lewis could still distinctly feel the presence and breath of the man beside her. Chapter 27, The Car Accident. Fortunately, Ethan Tanner remained still, and Nathan Tanner obediently clung to her hand, as if this were just another ordinary night. Sophia Lewis gradually relaxed and closed her eyes. After all that had happened today, she truly needed a good night's sleep to dispel the lingering fear. The night was silent. Moonlight filled the room, casting an unusually peaceful glow over the furniture. Suddenly, the blanket puffed up, and a small figure slipped out, quietly sneaking toward the door. As the door opened, the little boy paused and turned his head. "Mom, Dad, good night." With that, the small figure disappeared behind the door. The absence of the little one beside him left Ethan Tanner with an inexplicable sense of emptiness. Sophia Lewis was right, he really wasn't used to having someone sleep next to him. Watching the little boy sneak out of the blanket and hearing those words, he froze in place. "Nathan Tanner, don't move," Sophia Lewis mumbled in her sleep. A small, soft hand suddenly landed a surprising blow on Ethan Tanner's chest, the unexpected pain causing him to wince. This little girl, was she made of iron? Ethan Tanner frowned. But soon, Sophia Lewis's actions proved Ethan Tanner's assumption wrong. As if finding a comfortable spot, Sophia Lewis nestled closer to him, wrapping her arms and legs around him like an octopus. The softness unique to a woman made Ethan Tanner's breath catch. Strands of her silky hair brushed against his chin, the tickling sensation stirring something within him. Ethan Tanner had never claimed to be a gentleman. It was only because of his injuries that he had refrained from touching Sophia Lewis these past 2 days. But now, with the woman he had longed for over the past 4 years in his arms, his reason and desire tipped the scales all too easily. "Sophia Lewis, this is all your own doing," Ethan Tanner murmured, his hand slipping beneath her dress. The intoxicating sensation finally burned away the last shred of his restraint. Ethan Tanner leaned down, pinning Sophia Lewis beneath him. Without hesitation, just like 4 years ago, he indulged in the sweetness that was Sophia Lewis. The unfamiliar weight pressing down on her startled Sophia Lewis awake. Amid her panic, she caught the familiar scent of the man. It was him. But why? Sophia Lewis's mind was a whirlwind of confusion. The man's deliberate caresses sent tremors through her body. The vague sensations became unmistakably clear, and she yearned to be guided, carried to a realm of ecstasy. It was just like 4 years ago. After a passionate kiss that left her unable to think, Sophia Lewis suddenly remembered Nathan Tanner. Gritting her teeth, she pushed Ethan Tanner away. Our son," she gasped for breath. "Don't worry, not here." Ethan Tanner's hoarse voice replied briefly before hastily indulging in the sweetness that belonged to him. This time, Sophia Lewis was completely at ease. Desire intertwined with affection, coupled with the longing suppressed over the past 4 years. The two of them were fervent, moving through every position as if they were born knowing them. Even the moonlight outside the window couldn't bear the scene, quietly retreating behind the clouds. A sleepless night. Sophia Lewis glared at the gradually brightening window, at a loss for words. She kept wondering why she had been the one to take the initiative in all of this. Again and again, without a moment's rest. The consequence of excessive excitement was insomnia. Though her entire body felt crushed, unable to lift even a single finger, utterly exhausted, her mind remained strangely alert. Ethan Tanner lay asleep beside her, his heavy breathing steady and rhythmic. He must be even more tired than I am. Sophia Lewis didn't dare turn her head to look. Sophia Lewis. After a long while, the man suddenly called her name softly in a tender voice. Sophia Lewis's ears turned red, her heart racing. Help me call a doctor. Hearing this, Sophia Lewis quickly turned her head, instinctively taking a deep breath. White gauze was stained red with fresh blood, the man's face pale as a sheet, his breathing weak. Sophia Lewis panicked, hurriedly dressed, and pushed the door open, shouting Oliver Grant's name. Everything seemed chaotic. Ethan Tanner was rushed to the nearby hospital and taken directly into the emergency room. Sophia Lewis was so frightened that she stood dazed in the corner of the hallway. Oliver Grant couldn't bear to see her in such a disheveled state, so he took off his coat and draped it over Sophia Lewis. Madam, don't worry. The young master, he's just lost a bit too much blood. Once the wound is bandaged, he'll be fine, he gently reassured her. Oliver Grant's emotions were incredibly mixed. On one hand, he worried about his boss's injury. On the other, he was glad that the relationship between the two had warmed up. Of course, what shocked him the most was Ethan Tanner's hidden strength. For an old wound to tear open again, just how much exertion had he put himself through? Eleanor Lewis, however, remained as composed as ever. She simply asked the doctor about the reason for Ethan Tanner's recurring injury, then glanced at Sophia Lewis with a meaningful look before contentedly continuing her rehabilitation exercises. In contrast, Nathan Tanner clung to Sophia Lewis, persistently asking why Ethan Tanner was injured, nearly driving her insane. The boy truly couldn't understand. Last night, when he snuck out, his father was perfectly fine. How could he suddenly lose so much blood? Mom, you didn't secretly hit Dad while he was sleeping, did you? He asked worriedly. Sophia Lewis. Silence was as good as an admission, and Nathan Tanner let out a long, regretful sigh. If he'd known, he wouldn't have listened to Uncle Oliver Grant. Letting Mom and Dad spend just one night together had already left Dad seriously injured. If they slept together for a few more days, wouldn't Dad end up dead? The boy didn't want such a thing to happen. Ethan Tanner, now wrapped in another layer of gauze, was sternly warned by the doctor to refrain from any reckless behavior, leaving Sophia Lewis blushing furiously. The planned countryside trip was, of course, cancelled. All activities were confined to the house, and even important meetings with business partners had to take place in the bedroom. During the day, Nathan Tanner was taken out by Eleanor Lewis to play everywhere. At night, he clutched a small pillow, insisting on sleeping between the two of them. Sophia Lewis had no choice but to give in to the boy's demands. Ethan Tanner, on the other hand, remained calm, as if all the embarrassing incidents were solely Sophia Lewis's doing. He directed her with precision, yet whenever she turned away, his gaze softened involuntarily. Throughout these days, Oliver Grant was thoroughly sidelined, forced to endure an endless stream of public displays of affection, leaving him both envious and bitter. The 5 planned days extended into 10. It wasn't until Ethan Tanner had almost fully recovered that the group reluctantly bid farewell to Eleanor Lewis and set off back to Riverfield. As soon as they got off the plane, Ethan Tanner took Oliver Grant's car keys, glanced at Sophia Lewis playing with her son, and said in a low voice, "Take them back to the villa first." "What about you, third young master?" Oliver Grant asked with some concern. Although Ethan Tanner could walk on his own, driving was still difficult for him. "Where are you going?" "Let me drive you there." "No need, I can manage on my own." Ethan Tanner shook his head. He deliberately avoided Oliver Grant. Before boarding the plane, he had received a call from Diana Sanders, saying she urgently needed to meet him at their usual cafe. It was a good opportunity for him to clarify things with Diana Sanders. After all, Sophia Lewis had already witnessed the emotional entanglements between him and Diana Sanders, and he didn't want that silly girl overthinking things. Watching the mother and son get into Oliver Grant's car and leave, disappearing from sight, he finally opened the door of the Maybach and stepped inside. The car slowly cruised down the road. Feeling slightly bored, images of Sophia Lewis and Nathan Tanner surfaced in his mind, and the corners of his lips unconsciously curved upward. His happiness was just beginning. As the car was about to turn, a black truck suddenly rushed forward, crashing straight into the front of the car. Bang! A loud explosion echoed, the Maybach was flung far away, spinning several times before coming to a stop. Thick black smoke billowed up, the windshield shattered. Inside the car, the person's head slumped down, motionless. Chapter 28, Who Are You? At this moment, Sophia Lewis had just been brought back by Oliver Grant. She stared at the crystal Barbie statue in the room, lost in thought. As soon as she returned to the villa, an uneasy feeling crept over her, as if the person who had harmed her was still lurking, watching her every move. "Madam, please don't worry too much. All the old servants have been dismissed, and the new ones will arrive tomorrow." Oliver Grant noticed Sophia Lewis's anxiety and softened his tone to comfort her. Security had been tightened to the utmost degree. He also hoped the perpetrator would reveal themselves again. This time, he would ensure they had no chance to escape. In fact, he had once discussed this idea with Ethan Tanner, but it had been rejected. The safety of Sophia Lewis and Nathan Tanner was the top priority. "This is a phone for you. My number and the young master's number are saved in it. Oh, and Miss Carter's number as well." Mentioning Hannah Carter, Oliver Grant's expression briefly turned awkward. Although he wasn't particularly fond of the lively young lady, she was Sophia Lewis's friend, and he had to show some respect. Sophia Lewis accepted the phone and smiled at Oliver Grant. "Oliver Grant, thank you. By the way, stop calling me madam. It sounds so strange. Just call me Sophia from now on." "I wouldn't dare." Oliver Grant shook his head vigorously. "If the young master hears that, I'll be skinned alive." "Is it that serious?" Nathan Tanner, who was playing with a transforming robot, suddenly looked up. "Uncle Oliver Grant, Dad doesn't eat people. Why would he skin you?" Pfft, Oliver Grant couldn't help but laugh. "When your dad gets angry, it's scarier than eating someone," he joked. "Really?" Nathan Tanner frowned, his round face showing clear concern. "Then when Dad comes back, I'll greet him and tell him to treat you better from now on." "Deal." Oliver Grant immediately brightened up. He had always felt the villa was cold and unwelcoming, but today, it felt much warmer. Next, it was time to start preparing for their wedding. Oliver Grant thought cheerfully. The shrill ring of the phone abruptly cut through the warm moment. Oliver Grant frowned as he answered, his expression suddenly changing. What's wrong? Sophia Lewis noticed his unusual demeanor, a sense of unease rising in her heart. Oliver Grant ignored her, focusing intently on the voice on the other end, and quickly responded, "All right, I'm on my way. Third young master has been in a car accident and is currently at the hospital." Hearing this, Sophia Lewis felt as if lightning had struck her. Is he seriously injured? Nathan Tanner was the first to react. It's been confirmed that his life isn't in danger, but the specifics will only be clear once we get to the hospital. Oliver Grant's face was grave. Old wounds had yet to heal, and now there were new ones. How much pain could one endure? Sophia Lewis's heart ached so much it felt suffocating. Oliver Grant ushered Sophia Lewis and Nathan Tanner into the Bentley, which sped off toward the hospital. On the way, Oliver Grant drove at breakneck speed, as if doing so could somehow ease the guilt weighing on his heart. If only he had stopped Ethan Tanner from driving himself, perhaps none of this would have happened. "Mom, it'll be okay, it'll be okay," Nathan Tanner nestled into Sophia Lewis's arms, gently patting the back of her hand to comfort her. Sophia Lewis was in a terrible state of mind. As the little man of the family, Nathan felt it was his duty to console his mother. The Bentley soon arrived at the private hospital where Ethan Tanner had been taken. Oliver Grant didn't even bother locking the car as he hurried with Sophia Lewis and Nathan Tanner toward Ethan's hospital room. From a distance, Sophia Lewis saw the slightly ajar door to the room. Her heart tightened, and she instinctively gripped Nathan Tanner's hand. She was terrified she wouldn't be able to control her emotions. If she started crying in front of him, he'd surely scold her. Oliver Grant moved faster than her. As he pushed the door open, he didn't step inside immediately but instead froze, his face showing a look of astonishment. Sophia Lewis couldn't stop in time, bumping into Oliver Grant before glancing into the room. She was stunned as well. Ethan Tanner had woken up, a bandage wrapped around his forehead, suggesting the injury wasn't too severe. At that moment, he was engrossed in looking at Diana Sanders, who sat beside him, a gentle smile playing on his lips. Sophia Lewis's gaze froze on their tightly clasped hands, and her heart suddenly ached. "You're here." Diana Sanders smiled, lifting her head. She glanced at Sophia Lewis briefly before quietly releasing Ethan Tanner's hand. Sophia stood rooted to the spot, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. "Dad!" Nathan Tanner broke free from Sophia's grasp, shouting as he ran toward Ethan Tanner. "Dad, are you okay?" Ethan Tanner frowned slightly, staring at Nathan for a long moment before speaking. "Who are you?" As soon as he said that, everyone froze in shock except for Diana Sanders. "Dad, don't you recognize me?" Nathan asked in disbelief, his clear, innocent eyes blinking as he looked at Ethan Tanner with confusion. Ethan's frown deepened, astonished by how much this little boy resembled himself as a child. "Kid, you've got the wrong person." Ethan shook his head. "I'm not your dad." It was only then that he noticed Sophia Lewis standing at the door. His deep eyes flickered with a trace of disdain. "What's she doing here?" Ethan said coldly. "Oliver Grant, get her out." Hearing this, the corners of Diana Sanders' lips curved into a barely noticeable smile. Oliver Grant stood there, dumbfounded. What on earth had happened? "Ethan, you're injured. Don't get worked up." Diana gently placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, speaking softly. "I know," Ethan immediately softened his tone. "Oliver Grant, Sophia, Come with me for a moment." Diana straightened her back, her demeanor radiating authority as if she were the mistress of the house. Sophia felt uneasy, her worried eyes darting toward Ethan Tanner. But the man deliberately avoided her gaze, not even sparing Nathan Tanner a glance. "Nathan Tanner, come here." Sophia called to her son, waving him over. Nathan Tanner shook his head, still standing in place. The boy wanted to understand why his father suddenly refused to acknowledge him. Seeing Diana Sanders walking farther and farther away, Sophia Lewis had no choice but to temporarily leave Nathan Tanner behind and hurriedly chased after her with Oliver Grant. "Let the doctor explain the specific situation to you too." Diana Sanders sighed, knocking on the door with the sign, "Director's Office." As the door opened, a tall, slender man wearing glasses stood at the entrance. He was dressed in a white lab coat, looking scholarly. "It's you." Sophia Lewis was taken aback. "Miss Lewis, long time no see." The man adjusted his glasses and smiled gently. Kevin Zane, a high IQ talent that Riverfield only saw once in a decade, had lost his parents at an early age. After being featured in the press, he received support from the Riverfield business community to continue his education, which eventually allowed him to step into the upper class. Sophia Lewis had met him a few times. Although they weren't close, she had a deep impression of his intelligence. Chapter 29, Amnesia. "Are you the primary doctor treating the third young master?" Oliver Grant asked anxiously. "Please come in." Kevin Zane nodded, opening the office door wider. "This is the CT scan of CEO Tanner's brain. This section shows that his brain's neural center experienced an impact. Although it's not severe, the blood clot has affected the normal functioning of his central nervous system. In short, CEO Tanner's current condition is episodic amnesia." "Episodic amnesia?" Sophia Lewis unconsciously repeated, her mind going blank. Miss Sanders just conducted some tests and confirmed that CEO Tanner's memory has regressed to 5 years ago. Kevin Zane explained solemnly. "No wonder he looked at me like that. Since he has amnesia, I'll temporarily forgive his earlier behavior." "Can it be cured?" Sophia Lewis frowned and asked. "I have no way to resolve it." Kevin Zane shook his head with a wry smile. "Treating amnesia remains a challenging puzzle in modern medicine. I once participated in research on this topic during my time at Stanford, but there has been no progress to this day." "Then, what should we do?" Sophia Lewis felt her heart sink. "There's no other way. We can only guide the patient and help him recover his lost memories on his own." Oliver Grant and Sophia Lewis exchanged heavy-hearted glances. 5 years ago, this means Ethan Tanner has forgotten that night, forgotten how Nathan Tanner came into existence. This was what hurt Sophia Lewis the most. "Sophia, don't worry. Dr. Zane is the best neurosurgeon in the country. He will surely find a way to cure Ethan." Diana Sanders feigned concern, placing a hand on Sophia Lewis's shoulder. Thank you, Diana." Sophia Lewis forced a smile. "But Ethan currently only recognizes me." Diana Sanders hesitated slightly. "He might act a little out of line toward you." "I'm really sorry." Though her words seemed apologetic, anyone perceptive could discern the underlying provocation. 5 years ago, Ethan Tanner was indeed infatuated with Diana Sanders, and his behavior in the hospital room earlier was proof enough of that. Her words sounded like an apology, but for someone as sharp as Oliver Grant, it was easy to see the implied challenge behind them. "Miss Sanders, you've worked hard." Oliver Grant bowed respectfully to her. I believe the third young master will regain his memory soon. After all, he and Madame are already married. While I don't adhere to any religion, I hold marriage vows in high regard. Ethan Tanner had previously instructed him not to disclose his and Sophia Lewis's overseas marriage for now. However, with the sudden turn of events, if he continued to keep it a secret, this old flame in front of them might seize the opportunity to overstep. Sure enough, upon hearing Oliver Grant's words, a flicker of surprise crossed Diana Sanders' exquisitely made-up face. They're married? Since when? In Northern Europe, under the witness of the Tanner family's grandmother, officiated by the pastor. Oliver Grant responded loudly. Well then, congratulations to both of you. Diana Sanders forced a smile, her gaze lingering on the ring finger of Sophia Lewis. The ring, though not sparkling, was very bright. She hadn't expected Ethan Tanner to marry Sophia Lewis so quickly. But it didn't matter, as long as Ethan Tanner still loved her, sooner or later, she would kick this unfortunate mother and son out of the house. While this side was scheming against each other, the hospital room on the other side was far from peaceful. Here's a mirror, Dad, look, do I look like you? Nathan Tanner somehow pulled out a bronze mirror, quickly climbed onto the hospital bed, and held it up in front of Ethan Tanner. If it had been anyone else daring to act so boldly in front of him, Ethan Tanner would have been furious long ago. But this was just a little boy over 3 years old. As an adult, he truly couldn't bring himself to do anything. Kid, you should go find your parents. When he said the words, your parents, he deliberately emphasized them. My dad is you. Nathan Tanner sighed, a trace of disappointment flashing across his chubby, adorable face. Dad, do you really not remember anything? Listen carefully, kid. Ethan Tanner took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I'm really not your dad. Stop randomly claiming people as your relatives. Though he couldn't explain why this child resembled him so much. All right then, Dad, you're really hopeless. Nathan Tanner pouted. You promised to take good care of me and Mom yourself. Who's your mom? Ethan Tanner's heart stirred. Sophia Lewis, of course. Nathan Tanner raised his head. Your wife, Dad, did you forget? Hearing that name, Ethan Tanner's breathing suddenly quickened. They were mother and son. How could such a coincidence exist? What exactly had that woman done to him? At that moment, Sophia Lewis and her group returned. Concerned about Nathan Tanner, she walked in first. As soon as Ethan Tanner saw Sophia Lewis, his dark eyes flashed with fury. He ripped out the 4-needle from his wrist, jumped off the bed, and walked barefoot towards Sophia Lewis, grabbing her by the neck. Speak! What's the meaning of this, child? He glared at Sophia Lewis, his murderous intent evident, as if he wanted to devour her alive. Ethan Tanner's grip was strong. Within seconds, Sophia Lewis's petite face turned red, her eyes starting to roll back. Oliver Grant panicked and hurriedly rushed over to pull Ethan Tanner's hands away. Third young master, please calm down. Oliver Grant. Don't forget your place. Ethan Tanner roared like an enraged lion. Third young master. Miss Lewis is your wife, and Nathan Tanner is your biological son. Oliver Grant quickly explained. He fully understood Ethan Tanner's fury at the moment, which was why he needed to help him accept reality as soon as possible. Kevin Zane and Diana Sanders stood silently behind them, exchanging glances. What? Ethan Tanner froze, grabbing Oliver Grant by the collar and pulling him close to his face. Oliver Grant. You are my man. What, have you been bribed by that woman? His voice was chilling, sending shivers down Oliver Grant's spine. Third young master, you had a car accident and lost your memory. Miss Lewis is indeed your newlywed wife. Your marriage certificate was signed in Northern Europe, and you just returned to Riverfield this morning. If you don't believe me, you can ask your grandmother. As he spoke, his eyes shifted to Ethan Tanner's hand gripping his collar tightly. Third young master, you're still wearing your wedding ring. Oliver Grant forced a smile. Ethan Tanner was startled and quickly released his grip. He glanced at the ring on his ring finger, then frowned as he looked at Sophia Lewis's hand, confirming it was a matching pair. Humph, disgusting. Ethan Tanner removed the ring and threw it forcefully to the ground. The ring was about to roll under the cabinet when Nathan Tanner swiftly bent down and picked it up. Sophia Lewis silently watched Ethan Tanner's actions, her heart filled with turmoil. Chapter 30, Testing the Results. Everything seemed to return to the starting point. 5 years ago, Ethan Tanner hated her just as much, but she couldn't blame him. After all, it was all because he had lost his memory. This time, Nathan Tanner was genuinely angered by Ethan Tanner's attitude. Mom! The little boy clenched the ring tightly and ran over to Sophia Lewis. Sophia Lewis lovingly embraced Nathan Tanner. Judging by Ethan Tanner's demeanor, the conversation he had just had with Nathan Tanner probably didn't go well. She felt a bit regretful. If she had known Ethan Tanner would lose his temper like this, she wouldn't have left Nathan Tanner alone. Ethan Tanner obviously didn't believe it. He hated Sophia Lewis so much, how could he possibly have a child with her? Therefore, when he called Eleanor Lewis and received a definitive answer, it felt like a bucket of cold water had been poured over him, leaving him completely stunned. Third young master, here's the marriage certificate of you and madam. And this is the domestic marriage certificate. At this moment, Oliver Grant promptly handed over the phone, showing scanned photos of the documents for Ethan Tanner to see. The originals had all been kept by Eleanor Lewis. She said young people were hot-headed and feared they might argue and do something foolish in the heat of the moment. At that time, Oliver Grant thought Eleanor Lewis was overthinking. Now it seemed she was indeed wise. Ethan Tanner's eyebrows furrowed tightly, his handsome face cold enough to seemingly wring water from. The authenticity of the marriage certificates was yet to be discussed, but the handwriting on the English certificate was undeniably his. What exactly had happened? Ethan Tanner closed his eyes, trying hard to recall, but every effort brought a sharp, pulling pain to his temples, making it impossible for him to stand steadily. Ethan! Sophia Lewis stepped forward, but Diana Sanders suddenly pushed her aside from behind and quickly moved to Ethan Tanner's side. What's wrong? Are you okay? Diana Sanders held Ethan Tanner's arm, her face full of concern. Ethan Tanner quickly grasped Diana Sanders' hand and frowned, asking, Diana, what's wrong with me? You were in a car accident and lost your memory. Diana Sanders cast a resentful glance at Sophia Lewis before turning back to Ethan Tanner, her face filled with grievance. You and Sophia, even have a child together. How could this be? Ethan Tanner's eyes widened, his expression filled with disbelief. He clearly remembered driving to the airport to pick up Diana Sanders, the woman he loved, who rarely returned to the country. He was determined to hold on to her. My current memory stops 5 years ago. The day you came back to the country. Diana Sanders bit her lip as she finished speaking, her sparkling eyes suddenly clouded with a thin layer of mist. The two looked deeply affectionate, like a pair of star-crossed lovers. Although it was hard to bear, Sophia Lewis merely turned her face away silently, saying nothing. "Mom, that lady is pulling tricks on Dad again." Nathan Tanner looked up and muttered softly to Sophia Lewis. The boy noticed that this man was not acting like his usual father, so he decided observation was the best strategy for now. Sophia Lewis felt helpless. If she kept silent, Nathan Tanner's misunderstanding of Ethan Tanner would only deepen. She decided to take Nathan Tanner out of the hospital room to explain everything clearly. "Dad really lost his memory?" Nathan Tanner asked in disbelief. "Yes." Sophia Lewis nodded firmly. "So, don't upset him, okay? Then what should we do?" Nathan Tanner looked at Sophia Lewis with concern. "I'm worried about you, Mom. Dad and I look exactly the same. Even if he doesn't recognize me, he has to accept it." "But what about you?" Nathan Tanner's question left Sophia Lewis speechless. It was true that even if Ethan Tanner didn't remember Nathan Tanner, a DNA test would prove their undeniable bond. He couldn't deny his son. But with her, it was different. Although she wasn't sure when Ethan Tanner started liking her, it certainly wasn't during the period his memory was stuck in. 5 years ago. Back then, Diana Sanders had announced her temporary departure from the entertainment industry to study abroad. Sophia Lewis still vividly remembered how Ethan Tanner seemed like a lost soul that entire year. Whenever there was news about Diana Sanders, he would rush to her side immediately. That was when he loved Diana Sanders passionately. How could she ever compare? At that moment, Oliver Grant stepped out of the hospital room, wearing an awkward smile. "I got kicked out. Looks like we're in the same boat." Sophia Lewis tried to lighten the mood, though even she found her words awkward. "How's Dad?" Nathan Tanner looked up and asked Oliver Grant. "He doesn't believe a word I say." Oliver Grant sighed. Sophia Lewis remained silent. A loud bang startled everyone, making them turn to look. It turned out the door had been slammed shut. Moments later, the door opened again, and Kevin Zane stepped out. "Sorry." He spread his hands helplessly. "This is the current state of CEO Tanner's memory. Moreover, until the blood clot completely dissipates, it's best not to stimulate him." "So, are you saying we can't help him regain his memory?" Oliver Grant asked anxiously. "It's only temporary." Kevin Zane replied seriously, "If you forcefully stimulate his nerves, it could lead to even more severe consequences. So, I advise everyone to mainly observe during this period." "But, Oliver Grant." Sophia Lewis quickly stopped him. "Let's just follow the doctor's advice. Nothing was more important than Ethan Tanner's health." Even though she felt reluctant, it seemed like this was the only option for now. "I have other matters to attend to, excuse me." Kevin Zane nodded at Sophia Lewis. "Thank you, Dr. Zane." Sophia Lewis smiled. Kevin Zane quickly left. Out of their sight, the gentle and refined smile on his face gradually turned cold. Back in his office, Kevin Zane pulled out the CT scan he had just shown Sophia Lewis and placed it into another medical record file. At that moment, his phone rang. Seeing the words, "Dearest Lillian," on the screen, Kevin Zane smiled and answered. "Is everything going smoothly?" A sharp yet seductive woman's voice came from the other end of the line. "With my work, are you still worried?" Kevin Zane raised an eyebrow. The experimental results are incredibly accurate. That kid's memory has truly reverted to 5 years ago. Really? The woman sounded delighted. Kevin, your research has finally succeeded. Congratulations. Compliments alone won't cut it. His eyes gleamed with obsession behind his glasses. Come to my place tonight. Oh, you're terrible. The woman giggled. Maybe in a few days, my brother is home, and it's not convenient right now. It's been 3 days since we last met. Kevin Zane pushed up his glasses, his tone slightly irritated. He was addicted to her. My love, I don't want this either. Alright, just wait a little longer, okay? Talk soon. With that, she hurriedly hung up the phone. Kevin Zane's face was filled with gloom, and after a long moment, he let out a heavy sigh.